Okay, we are live. Welcome to the Stand to Reason Book Club, where we are covering the book Tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions, written by Greg Koukl. And this is session 7, episode 7. We actually have finished the book. So John, Tim, and I have read the entire book, and we went through each chapter and discussed what we liked, didn't like. I mean, of course, what we like. And we've been able to kind of interact with a lot of you guys who've been watching. Mm-hmm. And so those past 6 episodes are all available on our Stand to Reason Facebook page. So if you want to see any of those episodes, go to Stand to Reason's Facebook page and you'll see all of them. They're all archived there. Today, as some of you might realize, we are also streaming on YouTube. So for those of you who are on YouTube, if you're wondering, hey, where are the other episodes? This is the first episode we're actually streaming on YouTube. So the episodes aren't there. They're on Stand to Reason Facebook page. Okay, so go there. As you probably also noticed, we have a special guest on our show today.
And I have also read the book.
And yeah, so we had to have him read the book as well. Thankfully, he read it in time. But yeah, it's Greg Koukl, the author. And so now that we've kind of beaten up on him while he wasn't here, we can interact with him in person. No, we're glad to have Greg on, who is not just the author, but our boss and also our friend and mentor. And we're super thrilled to have him on the show. So welcome, Greg.
Thank you. You are my favorite people. So I just love hanging out with you, even if it's on pixelated screens.
Yeah, it's great. So our plan for today, since we've already finished the book, is to ask Greg questions about the book. And we want you, the audience on Facebook or YouTube, to post questions in the comments. So we can see some of you already posting some. And then we'll pose them to Greg and have them answer. So ideally, they'd be questions about the book or about the different tactics. So if you can make them that way, that would be helpful. But I'm going to first send it over to Tim and have Tim kind of frame our discussion this evening. So Tim, you want to jump in there?
So I see that there's already some questions coming in on the stream, and that's awesome. But just to get Greg warmed up here, we're going to throw him a softball, okay? That he can hit out of the park. And actually, this is a question I'm curious about because I'm not sure I know the answer to this question. Greg, can you give us kind of the history of where this book came from?
Sure.
How did you come about writing Tactics?
Yeah. Well, as we've talked together as a team, talking about writing in general, I have emphasized you never try to write something with a blank page. That you always want to have a background of information. You want to have a lot of material that you've collected and things that you've thought about, maybe thought through in little bits and pieces. And then you gather those pieces together and you make some coherent presentation out of it. We do that with talks. We do that with articles in Solid Grounds, for example, and a book is really no different. What ended up happening is very, very early on, I mean, compared to, the book came out 10 years ago, and now we have the 10-year anniversary edition came out just last year. So we got 11 years on the book now, I guess. But prior to that, I had been using Tactics for a long time, and Stand to Reason even developed some training tools that we used, a workbook and some videos and stuff like that. But it really started probably the early 90s when I gave my very first presentation on it for Craig Hazen when he was running an apologetics program at Simon Greenleaf University, where I was a student before I went to Biola and studied under J.P. Moreland, and before Craig moved his apologetics program over to Biola as well. And I think what Craig said, and I need to check with him about how this worked, but I had been using these maneuvers on the radio, okay? And when I say using these maneuvers, I didn't sit down and think, okay, how can I learn some maneuvers that will help me? What I did was I engaged, and being thoughtful about the way that I engage, and you all know that one of the things that I emphasize is being a student of your craft. Mm-hmm. Our craft is communication, it's apologetics, there's theology involved there. So we always want to be alert to improving in our knowledge or our technique or our capability, our execution. And so I'm paying attention to what's working and what's not working. I'm on the air for many years with the Crawford Broadcasting Network, taking questions, 3 hours Saturday, 3 hours Sunday. And I realized that there were certain patterns that I was following in dealing with some of these issues. And they were patterns that were bearing fruit. And when I realized they bore fruit, well, then I'd do them more. And I tried to hone them a little bit more. And of course, me being me, I would talk about them. I would talk to other people about it. I'd work it into my teaching in some way, or maybe I would just work it into an article. And so for those who have been around Stand to Reason for the earliest days, we're 27 years now, there's a lot of the material in the tactics books, even whole chapters, that started out as articles, either in Solid Ground or earlier than that, kind of a journal that we published called Clear Thinking. And so what I just tried to do is I get these ideas together. And I thought, well, that'll make an article, and I got to write an article, so I might as well put this together and think it through a little bit. And then when I had about 4 or 5 articles like this, and I thought, well, we need a solid ground. I can expand this concept in this way. And pretty soon I had, like lots of chapters. Solid grounds are 3,000 to 3,500 words. That's a good chapter length. And then the idea of taking the material and putting it into a book, having it published by a regular publisher, Zondervan in this case, was very doable, it seemed, because so much of the heavy lifting is behind me. I also had years now of experience, not only using tactics and refining them in play, as it were, but also teaching it to other people. And as speakers yourselves, that the more you talk about it, the better you get it yourself. The more you learn about it, which is an instruction to everybody listening here. You learn about tactics, find somebody to teach it to, even a small group, even your kids or whoever it happens to be. And you are going to not only multiply the impact of that information and knowledge and skill, but you're going to become better at it yourself. So all of these things kind of converged together. In 2009, Zondervan published the first edition of the book, Tactics, a Game Plan for Discussing Your Christian Convictions. So that was the genesis of the book proper. And notice it just went through a lot of steps. And somebody asked me how long it take you to write tactics. I said, well, about 20 years.
Yeah.
And the same thing with Story of Reality, because these were things that I had ideas that I'd worked on and developed for a long time, which is why I recommend to you as writers and to the rest of those listening who would like to have a better impact as a writer, don't ever lose anything that you've written or any clever thought that you have. Write it down, find a place to store it, because you never know when you're going to be able to cannibalize that document and put it into something else that's going to have a broader impact. So, Tim, that's kind of the basic story.
Yeah.
That's actually really encouraging to me, because I was nervous you were going to say it came like in a dream or a vision or like and look, as someone who writes on occasion, it's hard work, and it sounds like this was a labor of love over a long period of time, and now we're enjoying the fruit of that. So really, really cool stuff.
Well, they say writing is 90% perspiration, only 10% inspiration, but it's really 100% perspiration. I mean, that would be my take on it.
Yeah.
It's all work. It is really hard work.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool.
All right. Well, let's take some questions from the audience then. Ashton here is asking, what prompted you to write the new edition? Do you have any more books in the works? So this is actually a nice segue, since you just talked about writing the first edition.
Sure.
And then what led you to write the newest edition?
Well, what happened over 10 years of teaching the material to people and continuing to use it in a variety of venues, not just in the radio, but I've spoken on 85 college and university campuses. And in secular schools, we always have Q&A. And so there's a crossfire circumstance in there, although people pretty much are nice to me. And so I'm using these more often. So what I'm doing is I'm getting more anecdotes while I'm developing a nuanced capability of applying these, and even developing some new maneuvers, so to speak, some new tactics. And so consequently, after 10 years, I honestly, to be quite candid here, I thought, hey, 10 years is up. If we just reissued a 10-year edition, if I could talk Zondervan into doing that, it'll give it more attention and more people will buy it. And all I have to do is just brush it up just a little bit. But you guys know me, I can't do that kind of. What happens is, even though I had kind of selfish motives, when I started getting into the text, I realized there was all kinds of other things I wanted to add. I think I'd gotten to be a better writer over 10 years. And so there were just the normal stuff I wanted to freshen up quite a bit. I had to remove words like tapes, audio tapes, and things like that, references that date the text too much. And then I realized that I had expanded in quite a bit of the material. So some things where I only had maybe a page in a chapter about one thing, I had so much more I wanted to say about it. I just expanded that into a new chapter rather than making the chapters themselves too cumbersome. Also, there's changes in the culture. I had, maybe a page or not even a page of defending against the Columbo tactic. So what happens when people use questions against you? Now, the Columbo tactic, the way I characterize it, the way I teach people to use it, there shouldn't be any problem with Christians being asked, what do you mean by that? I mean, do you think I mind that question? Right. Or how did you come to that conclusion? Hey, sit down, man. Have a cup of coffee. Settle back. I'll tell you all about it, The third use of Columbo, though, is a little trickier because this is where people are asking questions to make a point and to lead you somewhere. And you want to make sure you're not getting led in a corner inappropriately. And in this particular area, there's been a lot of development in the last 10 years. And that is that there has been, Peter Bogosian, for example, who has written a whole handbook for creating atheists. And it's like a tactics book for atheists. I wrote a solid ground on it. And so there, I think the approach is manipulative. And I think that we need to be aware of that. So that was one area I actually did a whole chapter on, and I added a lot of Bogosian things in because there were some things that we just have come up in the last 10 years that need to be addressed. But I also realized that there were tactics that I was using that I'd never identified. And one big one was called the inside out tactic, which I use probably more than any other. But it's a subtle tactic because it's an approach. It's not so much a maneuver, but an approach. And it's the understanding that every human being is made in the image of God and must live in God's world. And therefore, God has built inside them certain understandings and knowledge that they cannot get away from even when they try. So morality is built into us. It's part of our nature. And we end up acknowledging it even when we try to deny it. There is no objective morality. Therefore, it's wrong for you to push your morality on me. There you go. There are no objective morals. Here's one, even when people are trying to deny these kinds of things, I give lots of examples of that. They still end up affirming them. And the reason is they can't not do that. Why? Because they're made in the image of God, and that which God has put on the inside always comes out on the outside sooner or later, usually when their guard is down and they're not thinking about it and they're not defending philosophical turf. So that was a very powerful tactic. It also is the only tactic that I suggest that trades on the existential circumstance human beings find themselves in. What I mean is that I shouldn't say circumstance. I should say the existential need that is true of all of us. And if that's a fancy word for some people, which I get it, here's the best expression of it. It came from Augustine. Lord, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. There is something we are longing and yearning for. Lewis talks about this a lot. I spend some time talking about it, especially towards the end in the book, The Story of Reality. And then when it comes, and that entails not only our sense of value and yearning and a desire and a hunger for something better than what we have, because we know we live in a fallen world, but also the understanding that we know we're responsible for a whole lot of that brokenness in the world, which makes us guilty. And so we yearn for forgiveness, even if we don't use those words. Well, so I talk about there in the book about evidences of this in people's lives who deny the Christian worldview, and how we can exploit that using questions. Then I have a chapter on what I call mini tactics, which are maneuvers that I can just spend like 2 pages or so to explain. I think I have 5 of them. And there are things I've talked about before. One is called What a Friend We Have in Jesus. And that's where you try to, if you can ever get Jesus to do your fighting for you, that's always better. Right. So, I mean, if Jesus, look at, if people are upset about Jesus being the only way, oh, you Christians are so narrow. I said, look at, that's not my idea. That's Jesus' idea. He's the one who said it first. He said it many times. It's hard to miss. So do you think Jesus was mistaken? Oh, now I'm pitting them against Jesus. And there are lots of ways to do that because people respect Jesus by and large. There's another one called Sticks and Stones and how you deal with when people call you names. There's another one called The Power of So, as in the word S-O with a question mark, like so. Like people say, well, there's a bunch of hypocrites in the church. Yep, there are. So, in other words, what is the significance for the truthfulness of Christianity?
Yeah.
That there are people in the church that are fakers. Okay. By the way, there's another tactic where I answer that question differently. It's a mini tactic. It's called moving toward the objection. Instead of trying to defend against it, you embrace it. So when people say there are hypocrites in the church, I say, you bet there are. Actually, there's a whole lot worse than hypocrites. Man, there are fornicators and adulterers, and there are thieves, and there are swindlers, and there are all kinds of nasty people that end up in church. That's why they need Jesus. Yeah. That's the point. So notice how I've moved towards that objection in responding and embracing it, and in embracing it, just kind of diffusing it a little bit. I got that from a movie, by the way, Clear and Present Danger. In the beginning of that movie, the details are in the book. I won't go into them, but some might remember that. That's what Harrison Ford as Jack Ryan recommended the president do with regards to a difficulty he was in. Move towards it. Acknowledge it, lay hold of it, give them no place to go was the recommendation. So anyway, those are the things that people will find in the new edition that they won't find in the old edition. And by the way, just for the record, the new edition has that, wait a minute, I got yellow tabs. That new edition has that red thing on it, okay? Here's the old edition, it doesn't have it. Here's the other thing I want you to see. Look at how much thicker that one. The new edition is than the old one.
So are you saying that people should still buy the new one even if they have the old one?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely. No question about it. There's 40% more material in it, Alan. Oh. I have doubled the number of tactics in the book. So if you have a dog-eared copy of the first edition, God bless you. My love goes out to you. You have done well, a good and faithful servant. Now give that away to some new Christian and buy the new one and take a step up. Yeah. That would be my recommendation.
So, Greg, do you have any other books in the works?
Well, I haven't committed on anything at the moment, and I'm not sure what to do. So, I mean, other than I just expanded the workbook for the video series on tactics. The new edition has come out. We've expanded the video series to include 2 more sessions. So instead of 6 sessions, it's 8 sessions for the Zondervan video series with tactics as a workbook that goes with it. And I have a copy of one of them around here somewhere. No, I can't find it. But anyway, there's a workbook that goes with it. But the workbook is shy 2 or 3 chapters as well. So what I did is about a month ago, I turned in the final copy of those chapters. So the workbook will now be expanded with the video that we've already done. And so within a few months, that full new material will be offered. And I just finished, actually, God willing, tonight or tomorrow morning, I will finish the workbook for the Story of Reality. The videos are out by Zondervan. You know, I know this is going to sound really weird to say it, but I'm just going to be completely candid with you. I love that book, The Story of Reality, and I sometimes read it just for fun. All right? Because there are things in there that deeply touch me because of the truth that is embedded there in an easily accessible manner. All right? So when I'm going through the workbook and finishing up the workbook, I actually had to watch every one of the videos of the 6 videos that are associated with the 6 sections of the book. And to make sure that my outline now that I just built would fit the videos. And I just have to tell you, I'd never watched those videos before. But I may watch them again. because I think that the material there is so rich, it's so clearly communicated, and I was edified. I know this sounds so weird. I wasn't edified by my face on the screen. I'm not taken with that, all right? Please trust me. I was really moved by the material that is clearly characterized in the story of reality that gives you the big picture. And I just finished going over the notes for the cross today. I proofread them, and I'm going to finish up with the resurrection tomorrow because I'm almost done with that one. Indeed, I watched the video for the resurrection, and which is the final story, and what happens when at the end, perfect justice or for perfect mercy. And what does perfect mercy look like for us when our desires, we talk about wiping the tear from our eyes, that's in there. But the thing that Lewis develops is how this yearning and this hunger and this desire for all the things we lost in the fall, all of those will be satisfied. We will be we finally reunited with a Father who our hearts have missed our entire lives, even though we're in relationship with God. And as Lewis puts it so aptly, the door that we've been knocking on all of our lives will finally open. Mm. And I wish I had written those words because they're so good, but Lewis did it, and I don't want to take it from him. So anyway, I'm still enjoying the story of reality, even though it's like 3 years out now, but I'll see what I have to look back on the stuff I've got and the things that I see if I have anything more to say. Let's just put it that way.
Right. Greg, I want to jump in here because you said something about being moved by the story of reality. And when we were going through tactics, I think for me, and I think John made the same observation, something in that book, in the chapter Inside Out.
Yeah.
It's almost like you change the way you're communicating a little bit. It seemed like I was reading the story of reality in that chapter. And it was, it was moving. I think it's my favorite chapter in the whole book. And so I don't know, do you have a sense of that when you were writing it, that you were kind of changing gears or?
Well, yes. Yeah, it's because of it. Thank you. And that's a good reason for anybody to be sure and get the second edition, because that's the best chapter according to Tim. So we have that endorsement there from Tim.
Yeah.
But no, you're absolutely right. It is distinct because, like I said, it's not so much a maneuver, but a frame of mind and a general approach. It's an awareness that we have. And it's a maneuver that bypasses, in a certain sense, it bypasses the intellect, where everything else that we do, really, by and large, is to go to the mind, to the rational issues. And that's one of the things that God uses. But I mentioned in the book, too, that sometimes it's not rational problems. Sometimes they're emotional, sometimes prejudicial. Sometimes people are just plain stubborn, and blockheaded. And this is why that sometimes you can do an end around that. And in a certain sense, I want to be careful how I say this so it's not misunderstood, but in a certain sense, go right for the heart. Yeah. This is what I mean by existential need. I don't mean toy with their emotions. That's not what I mean. I'm going to the heart of the matter of things they really know and their deep sense and awareness of personal need, and in particular for forgiveness. And I gave this talk at Berkeley many years ago, and at the end of the talk, I was talking about relativism. At the end of the talk, and this is in the chapter on the story of reality. I'm sorry, the chapter on that you like so much, Inside Out. And at the end of the message, I said, with the failure of relativism, this shows that some form of objective morality is true, and this has explanatory power. It explains why we all feel guilt. And I would engage the audience at this time, and I'm giving you the thumbnail sketch, but we all feel guilty. Why do we feel guilty? Well, maybe culture causes it or something like that, I suggested, but maybe, how about this? Maybe we feel guilty because we are guilty. And then I say to them, and I've used this many, many times with audiences, and I say to them, the answer to guilt is not denial. That's relativism. The answer to guilt, I said, is forgiveness.
That's right.
And this is where Jesus comes in. Now, even when I mentioned that line, just this moment, something stirred in my heart, because that is speaking directly to a genuine existential need that we all have in our lives. And I'm not arguing that Jesus is the Savior at this point. I'm just speaking to the need, to the hunger that needs to be fed, to the thirst that needs to be satisfied. And what I say at the end of that chapter is they can always try to run from God, but they can't run from themselves. I say it again because it's so important. They can run from God. They can run from the arguments. They can run from you and me, but they cannot run from themselves. And this tactic kind of trades on that. So I thank you. I appreciate that you liked it. I liked it too. And it is a different style because of the nature of that particular tactical approach.
Yeah. Right.
I have a question I'd like to add on the tail end of that, if that's okay.
Sure.
With the new material that you added, like whole chapters, was it hard? This is a very practical question. Was it hard to blend the two, finding the new to fit with the old? And then also of the new material, what would you say is the most significant and that we should pay most attention to?
Well, the last one first, the inside out tactic, I think is the best. And one very easy to understand and practical one is what a friend we have in Jesus. So I just draw attention to those. But it wasn't difficult. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, my first intention was just to gloss the book a little bit and make it a little more reader friendly, or and then I realized I got lots of stuff to say, and so it just there's new stuff that just kept flowing into it, and so it just began to expand considerably. So when I did the final word count, I was at 40% more, and which kind of justifies Zondervan going to all the trouble to put out another edition. And it justifies people purchasing the book a second time. So I that particular part for me, John, wasn't hard. Sometimes the hardest part of writing is getting moving with an idea, getting your substance down and getting your basic structure and kind of voice going. Okay, once you can kind of get that going, okay, now you're moving in a direction. It's easier you got inertia of motion. It's overcoming the inertia of rest that's more difficult. And this is what I'm doing right now as I think about new projects, so new writing projects. But when I did the rewrite in this book, I already had my inertia. I had the structure. I had the general approach. And I'm just glossing things. And as I'm glossing things, I'm realizing, well, I can put this in a separate chapter. So it wasn't that difficult for me to pick that up. It was hard, a lot of perspiration, no question.
Yeah.
But anyway.
I asked just because the like that chapter Inside Out, it did seem like it was a much more pastoral voice. And I started to think 10 years, man, I've only been a Christian for 13 years. You rewind the clock 10 years ago, I looked a lot different, my voice and everything. And I'm wondering if one of the reasons why that voice changed a little bit in that chapter was because you've changed, because your writing has changed or anything like that. And I would think melding the two and trying to get into my own mindset would be hard.
I would like to think that both are true. I changed and my voice change, or I don't know what else you put in there, but a change is good if it's in the right direction. Yeah. And if you are following hard after God, it's almost always going to be in the right direction, even though it's going to be hard. And so I have had other people tell me after they've read the second edition that they thought the entire voice of the second edition sounded different to them. And there was I don't know. Again, I don't want to draw a lot of attention to myself, but since you asked, maybe a maturity that was reflected in the second edition and the way I engage, and maybe a little more softness or something. I'm not sure, but I think that's true. I think. Yeah.
All right, let's go to some more people who are watching and asking questions and comments here. This is a comment. Greg's books have helped me immensely in how I think and speak about my trust in Jesus of Nazareth. And he makes mention of watch your language.
Yes. Nicely done there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, even the title of the book, right? The game plan for discussing your Christian convictions is in itself using that tactic of not using just old Christian lingo. Yeah. So that's a good point. Let's see here. So great. I have no idea until an hour ago there's a book club for this. I'm currently reading Tactics and love it. Will there be any more book clubs?
Well, that's for you.
John and me. Is there a plan, guys?
We got to talk.
We got to talk.
Well, I heard some chatter that you want to go to a different author, so I'm well, whatever.
Right.
No, because it's that's for you guys to answer. I really
It's possible we'll have another book club. We'll see.
I hope so.
We're talking about it. We might switch the night as well. We're thinking it's been 7 weeks in a row where, I mean, it's 9
that includes Mother's Day and Easter.
Yeah, we've been faithfully, here.
And Mother's Day was harder to sell than Easter was.
That's right.
So, yeah. So I know for you guys, it's around dinner time. For me, it's it's
right.
weekend, winding down. So we may pick a different night.
Yeah.
So yeah, stay tuned. This has been successful, and we've had a lot of fun, and people have been engaging with the material. So yeah, so we're definitely open to it.
Yeah. Here's another question. Do we absolutely always lose if I or the person with whom I'm speaking gets upset? And this is, of course, a reference to one of the points.
Okay, that's a good question, because I mentioned this as a stylistic issue for ambassadors. And of course, we're trying to be good ambassadors. When we use a tactical approach, it's part of the wisdom element: knowledge, wisdom, character, wisdom, and artful method, characters in an attractive manner. One of the reasons that I started Stand to Reason 27 years ago with Melinda as my helper there was because the conversations that people were having were, one, very shallow, and secondly, very shrill. And the shrillness wasn't helping us. And so this is one thing that I wanted to try to model differently to others, although I had been a regular contributor to the shrill and shallow conversations. So I needed a makeover myself. So the aphorism that I offered, if anybody gets mad, then I lose, is the summary of the two statements I make, is a generalization. When I say I lose, what I mean is, in that situation, I am not going to have probably a salutary impact on another person's life. If I'm trying to persuade them of something and I'm getting really angry about it, then this doesn't commend my ideas well to them. If I'm not angry, but they get mad at me, then they have all their defenses up and they're not listening very carefully. And so they're also not in a persuasive mood. Incidentally, this is most obvious in family dynamics, like marriage, or with kids. So, but that's hardest to manage in those circumstances because there's so much emotionally at stake. But it's the area where we should be most careful about those things. And I'm not a good example of that. I'm just saying up front. But it turns out sometimes when people get angry at us that this is because we're touching a nerve, and later on they're thinking about it. The Holy Spirit's doing a work. We may not always be aware of that, but that I do know that dynamic is in place oftentimes. So, strictly speaking, it is not always the case that if they get mad, we lose. Okay. But it is a generalization, as an aphorism, as a kind of pithy saying, to keep reminding ourselves of doing our best to mind our manners on our behavior and communicating the message as carefully as possible without taking the truth out of it. Okay. And the substance out of it. And here's the way, if we have made, if the other person is angry because of us, shame on us. If they're angry because of the truth, clearly and graciously communicated, shame on them. That's kind of the idea.
Yeah, good. Chris asks, Greg, when writing the new material, was there any motivation to respond to the work by writers like Peter Bogosian, who have used a similar approach on the atheistic side? Yeah,
actually, he did inform a section of the chapter called Turnabout, which is how do you defend against the Columbo tactic? That had been part of another chapter, improving your Columbo tactic. And then I realized I had so much more to say. I put it in a separate chapter and called it Turnabout. I also put the Professor's Ploy and Getting Out of the Hot Seat in a in a separate chapter as well. But I go into some detail there regarding Bogosian. Those who follow our Solid Ground, and if you haven't signed up for this, you guys got to go to our website and sign up for our monthly training material, which includes Solid Ground every other month, and then the alternating months, simple letter, a single one-page letter, which is my mentoring letter to you. But we send that out all the time, and most of the things that you find in a book has been in one of those letters, like what a friend we have in Jesus, or moving towards the objection, or watch your language. These were all mentoring letters that made their way into the book. So, but I have written a Solid Ground just on that eventually made its way into the book, and it's still online, and it's called Tactics for Atheists. Tactics for Atheists, and I am specifically dealing with the Peter Bogosian situation.
Got it.
The Savvy Rose asked, see the comment there. Greg, how do you shorthand record your conversations to best remember them? I know you say, like, in the car, you're driving, the idea comes to you. You don't text it out, you record it. How do you do that?
If she means, is it Savvy Rose? I mean, if that person means that when an idea comes to me, how do I do that? I have my phone in a little holder, okay? And then I just go to the email. You can tap it. You don't have to hold it. And while I'm driving, I go to email, and I do tap in my own name to send an email to myself. Then I put the microphone on, and I start dictating. And then I just say all this stuff there. And then what I end up with is a email that is text that can easily be, and then I send it, to me. It's one way of getting emails that I really like. So the text I can just cut and paste and put in a doc and then work with it. All right. Sometimes I also have a stenographer's notepad, 5x10 or whatever those are. And sometimes I'll pull that out and jot a few notes on if I need to, and just to get some things down. Then later on, I'll expand in a recording. But if I'm just talking or walking or whatever, I always have a pad of paper with me when I'm having my time with the Lord, because I'll get a thought and I don't want to lose it, and I'll write some things down. And sometimes that's when the writing is easy. There's a flow of things, of inspiration. These ideas come out, and I just get the basic things down that I can craft later. Sometimes I'll just dictate those into the phone. But if I don't know what to do with it, I just put it in a big giant file, and I try to give it a little heading. I could go look at the file now on my computer, and it's hundreds of pages of Word docs, just all these different ideas. So probably most I'll never get to, and they'll die when I do. but it's just such a bad feeling for me to think of something significant and then have it disappear. Yeah. And I said, nobody else can benefit from it, and I can't even benefit from it again. It's gone. The worst time is when it happens in the shower.
So, how I solved that problem, Greg?
Okay.
Oh, geez.
No, it's not bad. It's I bought these things called Aqua Notes, and it's a little. In fact, I think I can pull it up right here. It's just a little notepad that you can stick to the side of your shower.
No kidding.
Waterproof. And
wow.
because I seriously, for some reason, whenever I'm showering, have all these ideas for things I want to add in my presentation. So the pencil, I just write it down, and the pages are waterproof. It's amazingly clear. It's great.
Is it like a grease pencil of some sort?
I don't know. It seems like a regular pencil to me, but it's called Aqua Notes Waterproof Notepad. I got it on Amazon for $9.
Okay, so now I've got to write this. So what am I going to do now?
How long are you taking a shower for, guys? I mean,
I normally don't take a long time, but when I get an idea, I'm like, oh shoot, because what happened was I would always think of the idea. I think, okay, I'll write it down when I get out. But by the time that happens, like, I'm interacting.
Yeah, and sometimes if you're trying to solve, I mean, this is kind of writer talk here, but you're trying to solve a problem, a presentation problem with a text, the order, the structure of the paragraph or something. I find that when I'm working on it, it doesn't come so easily. But if I were just saying, Tim, you know what? Dadgummit, I can't figure out how to say it. And he said, well, what are you trying to say? And I said, well, I'm trying to say this. and then it just comes right out the way I want it. Then I got to write like crazy. So anyway, just for the record,
Aqua Notes. Yeah.
Aqua Notes, okay, and I wonder how many of our listeners have just done the same. But this is a huge, I don't know, secret. It's a huge professional benefit to have different ways not to ever lose an idea or a sentence or a thought or maybe a mini outline in my mind.
I had just our first breakfast together, Greg. I had just given my testimony at church.
That's right.
You remember. This is years ago, and you asked if I wanted to get breakfast with you, and I did. And in the middle of the breakfast, you were, I think, brainstorming for Story of Reality. So constantly you were talking into your phone, recording notes.
Listen, I have
explained this whole principle to me, of course, but it was just really funny. I was getting an inside peek at Story of Reality.
Well, I have actually from the podium in the middle of a talk done that. And I'll make a joke out of it. I say, wait a minute, I got to write that down. I never thought of that again. And I can't count on some brilliant thing hitting my brain twice. I've got lightning doesn't always strike twice kind of thing. And I write it down. But I'll tell you a significant time this happened, just as an aside. In the book, there's a chapter called a short chapter in the book of Story Reality. And it's called In Between. It's just called In Between. It's a very short one. But in a Q&A way up in northern it was somewhere in Canada, which is always northern, I guess, from where I sit, Alberta or someplace like that. I was way up north there. It was like 25 degrees below zero outside. And that Sunday, somebody actually ridden a motorcycle to church. He was the chosen frozen, I think. In any event, so a doctor asked about in the Story of Reality talk during the Q&A afterwards. He says, how when a woman says to me, why did my child die? Why did my child die? My daughter, my 2-year-old, why did they ask him, the Christian. He said, how do I answer them? Well, I paused, obviously, to collect my thoughts a little bit. And that's when one of these things came to me. And so I went and I offered a thought that you can find in that short chapter called In Between. And the idea is we're in between the beginning and the end. And so we're in the middle of a war, and in war, there's casualties. Okay. And so I talk a little bit about that. But after I answered the question, I said, wait a minute, hold the presses kind of thing. I got to write this down. I got to write down. So they were very patient with me. And I took about 2 minutes to write down the guts of that. And it made it into the book. I don't even know if I footnoted them for that. Saying thanks for the patience or whatever. But when I came back a couple of years later to the same church, I told them that little aside made it into the Story of Reality. So it's crazy how these things happen, but it underscores the importance of not losing anything.
All right, we only got 15 minutes, so we got to get through some more questions here. Cyber Rose has another good question about advice using tactics with LDS or with Mormons. Maybe is there a tactic that you use when they come to your door, like something that you
I see. Oh, so not a particular question, just a general one. Well, the issue, one of the biggest issues with Mormons, and this isn't my strength here. Amy Hall is really much better at this, but I'm just thinking conceptually that the difficulty with LDS in terms of engaging them is their epistemology. And that is, how do they know something to be true? And no matter what you end up saying to them regarding that might be they take as a critique of Mormonism, they're going to say, well, look, I have this experience. I have this burning in the bosom. And in fact, a lot of times they'll lead with that because they want you to have that experience too. And then they go to James chapter 1. And so what I have, when they do that, and most people who have talked with them are familiar with that maneuver. You want to be gentle with them because they are very, very emotionally committed to this emotional experience they have that, in their view, verifies the Book of Mormon. Ironically, the Book of Mormon is not theologically intense. It's the other books that come along with it, like the Doctrine of Covenants and the Pearl of Great Price, that are more of a problem, but they kind of get in the door with the Book of Mormon. And so they'll cite this passage out of James. Okay, now there's two ways to approach this here. One of it is contextually. When somebody cites a passage like that, in this particular case, they're citing the verse that says, if anybody lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, and he will give it to him liberally and without reproach. So if you don't have the wisdom to know that the Book of Mormon is God's book, all you have to do is ask God, and he will show you whether it's his book or not. I mean, that's their application at first. Okay, when you know somebody like that is taking a verse out of context, which is the case here, it's not talking about that. It's talking about wisdom to endure through trials. There is never an appeal to reflect in a certain sense on an emotion you're having to determine whether a thing is from God or not. Testing the spirits is a different kind of thing. It's a doctrinal thing, actually. But in any event, this is what they make that out to be. So I might say, where is that? Oh, that's in James chapter 1. Really? What's happening in James chapter 1? I promise you, they will not be able to tell you. I promise you. By the way, it's good for you to know what's going on in James chapter 1.
Yeah.
Okay. But, okay, well, why don't we turn there? Okay. All right. And then you start reading from the first verse. Consider it all joy, my brother, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance, etc., etc. But if you lacked wisdom. So when you get to that, and you can have them read it and say, well, when he says, if you lack wisdom, what do you think James is referring to when he says we lack wisdom that we need to ask about? And see, the key there is, I mean, I won't play this out anymore, but I think you get the point. You're trying to keep them in the context so they can see that this passage does not give a measure or a method for determining which books offered as books from God is the way to figure it out. It's not, he does not have this in mind. It's not even remotely there. And in this case, hopefully you'll put a stone in their shoe. They're not going to change their mind right there. They're Mormons. They're totally given their family and everything. They're locked into the system. But I think it's fair to ask them, do you think it might be that you could be misusing this verse? Okay, that's one side of it. Okay, now here's another approach that focuses on the same concept of how do you know the Book of Mormon is true or Mormonism is true. It's a subjective test. The Lord will show me. Okay, I had a burning in my bosom. And so here's the series of questions that you might ask. Say, let me ask you a question, Elder Bob. Okay, we'll just call him Elder Bob. Elder Bob, let me ask you a question. If I were your Mormon brother and I told you that next door there was a real pretty gal who is another man's wife, but I have been watching her over the fence and I really like her. And I prayed really hard and I have a burning in the bosom regarding God showing me that it will be okay for me to pursue this woman. If I told you that, now I don't think Mormons believe that. I mean, I'm going to qualify it for him. Right. I'm just going to say, I don't think Mormons believe that. But I mean, if I were, as your Mormon brother, to say that, notice I'm using the same test that he's using to determine whether the Book of Mormon is from God. If I were to say that to you, what would you say to me? And I suspect he would say, well, we already know that adultery is wrong. Okay, now that's what you want to hear. Because what he's saying, and then I might narrate what's going on for him. So in other words, what you're saying to me is that when you already have clear revelation regarding something important, we don't need to ask God about any new revelation we think we have. We can always measure it by the old revelation. Okay. And so there's an epistemological maneuver there. We want to say, here's how we do our epistemology. Here's how we know what we know. And most of you, I think, can see where I'm going with this. And that's the kind of conversation you have. But then they might say, well, we do believe the Bible as far as it's properly translated. Okay, well, I have no qualm with that. I don't believe a poorly translated Bible either, but which parts are properly translated? That's the question.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Well, then how could you use the Bible? Is James properly translated? Because that was the verse you just quoted. And see, notice they have a deceptive way of using scripture. And these questions are meant to prod them and poke them and help them to see, without blaming them aggressively, that they're manipulating texts and they can't apply the rules that they apply for their benefit to other passages that may go against them. And so this is how the questions are. I'm using questions in that environment, in that conversation, to put a stone in that person's shoe, so to speak.
Yeah, they're taking the roof off in that case too.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, so let's try to, maybe we can, if we want to get all the questions, try to speed up your answer if you can. Like, just dial it down by like 30%.
False, just true or false.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, no.
Yeah. No. There we go. That's it. I covered them all.
So, how do you go about finding a publisher, and at what stage should you find one?
Well, I mean, stage. Let me just say this quickly. Publishing houses are commercial operations. Okay, they sell a certain kind of product. If you want them to sell your product, okay, you ought to go to the right seller. So if your product is like a bundt cake, you're not going to go to Ace Hardware and ask them to sell your cake. Okay, wrong retailer. You've got to deal with a publisher that is in your area. It's a major problem, people. They send manuscripts to the wrong place. Secondly, if you want to get a publisher, you have to have a marketable idea. And you have to have the ability to communicate it in a saleable way. So generally, the way you get a publisher is you send a book proposal to them, which is about 10 or 15 pages long, and it describes what you want to do and why anybody should read a book that you wrote, which is why most people write books self-publish, and they sell to their friends, and after 30 copies, they run out of friends, and that's it. It's okay, but the thing is, their ideas are not marketable to a mass audience. So you have to ask yourself, why would a publisher want to take a risk and publish this book that I'm suggesting to them? What market need is there? They're going to ask you, what other books are like this? And if you want to write a basic apologetics book, I'm just saying, you're dead in the water. Forget about it. There's 1,000 of them out there by really qualified people. I wouldn't even do that. In fact, Zondervan has asked me to do it. I said, no, I'm not going to do it. Why? There's a bunch of them out there. I can't improve on what's already there. Now, if there's a different hook, if there's a different angle, there's something else, a new way of putting it or something, then that's different. I just read a book and endorsed it, one coming out in the fall by Elisa Childers. And it's basic Christianity book, but pertaining to the progressive church. So she teaches sound doctrine and apologetics pertaining to the particular challenge that she's facing there. It's very marketable. It's well written. She's very capable. And I hope you get it, especially if you're involved in what's so-called progressive church movement. Also, if you have I have an agent. I didn't for my first book, which was Relativism, but after Relativism, there was a little bit of a track record there. I sold some books with Frank Beckwith. Then I secured an agent, and an agent will help a lot. But an agent's going to have the same reason to want to spend time with you. Your ideas have to be good. You have to deliver properly. And one of the things that a book proposal entails is like a chapter or two of finished copy so they can see whether you can write.
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of things. It's not easy, and the book writing business is getting more difficult. Authors sell more books than publishers. And fortunately for me, I have a fairly big footprint publicly that makes a big difference. It's called Stand to Reason.
Yeah. John, this question's for you. This is a quick one. How often are these book club videos?
How often are they?
Yeah.
Once a week. They were.
And where can they find them?
You guys, you know what? You can find them on the Stands for Reason Facebook page anytime, day or night. You can go there and you can watch them. You can speed them up. You could fast forward through them to the good parts. But it's worth your time, actually. We had a lot of fun doing this.
It's true.
So I had a really good time, at least.
Yeah. All right. Susan's asking, are there any red flags for conversations we should not engage in or we should end?
Well, one red flag is when you're dealing with a steamroller, and there's a chapter on that. When you're dealing with people who constantly interrupt and they're trying to manipulate you with kind of power moves, it shows that they're not interested in conversation. They're not interested in answers. It's similar to the kind of person Jesus described in Matthew 7 when he says, don't throw what is holy, your pearls before swine, or what is holy before dogs. They'll trample it under your feet, and what good is that? So I think this is this. If you feel like the holy things that you're offering are being trampled underfoot, and they're about to turn and tear you to pieces, that was another phrase, and then that's a time just to exit stage left. This is part of the this is the last step of the tactic that you use with that kind of person. You first stop them. Second, if that doesn't work, then I give some technique to that. Then you shame them, and I give some further technique to that. And if that doesn't work, then you leave them, and sometimes that's necessary to do. There are times too when you find that you may be completely out of your ken with an individual regarding a certain issue. There's some people I wouldn't debate about things. I've been invited to do some things. I said, look, this isn't my strength. It's better to get somebody else for this. And this happens in conversations too, where, I was sitting next to a bug doctor once. He's an entomologist. He had a big beetle on his computer screen and a picture, and so I figured, he's a bug doctor. So I realized, though, that I am not going to be able to engage the evolution issue with him, because every time I raise some particular issue, he's going to come up with some scientific information that I couldn't deal with. So what I spoke to him about was principally the kind of power move, of silencing voices of dissension in that movement. And he ended up acknowledging, that's not a good idea. So I chose the direction that I felt I had a contribution to make in. And if I don't have such a direction, then I just turn into a student. This is in the new book. Actually, it's in the old book too, but it's the idea of getting out of the hot seat, getting out of the hot seat. If you can't handle the heat, and you're getting pushed around by somebody, you can change the directions by becoming a student and using the first two Columbo questions. Well, slow down. Tell me what you mean by that. You know a lot more about this than I do. Help me understand your view and your reason for it, and then let me think about it. So in that situation, now you're back in the driver's seat, but they can talk all they want, and you're not under any threat because you've already acknowledged that you can't answer what they have to say. You have an opportunity to think about it when the pressure is off, is the idea. Yeah. So those are the situations when I would back off a little bit.
Right. And since we're coming close to the end of our broadcast, I figured I'd pick a question that it relates to the very last chapter of the book where you talk about dry tinder.
Sure.
And the whole concept of trying to get a church excited about, apologetics and whatever. So
yeah, that's in the last chapter.
She said she tried implementing dry tinder, but have had trouble finding women committed to reading and discussing good books.
Well, you're not, Patty, God bless your heart. You're not the first person who has run into that difficulty. And I want to be careful what I say at this particular moment. Put it this way, that activity is just more popular with guys than it is with gals, generally speaking. And in your community, I don't know how large it is, but especially in a smaller spiritual community that might be, and particularly one that may be given to a whole different approach. If you're in a Pentecostal charismatic community, you're going to have a hard time. And I just know this because the emphasis is quite a bit different in those communities. I'm not judging or anything. I'm just saying that's the way it is. So it might be, we can pray about God bringing some people to you, obviously, but it might be that you're swimming in a real small pool there and you need to expand a little bit. And this is one thing we've learned in the last 2.5 months is how capable we can be in expanding in relationships with people who are at a distance. I mean, we're doing it right now, for goodness sake. So I think this is going to be the silver lining to the problem we've been facing with the shutdowns, and that is we're learning how to have a lot of workarounds with people who are a long way away that we can't talk with. So it may be, Patty, that you are able to somehow find some kindred spirits. I mean, some of them might be the names that are right here on the live comments. I don't know. Find some kindred spirits that are willing to engage online with you in things like this and have groups. Yeah, I don't know the best way to pursue that because I mean, I got my hands full with other things, and I'm not particularly clever when it comes to the digital world. But somebody said something the other day. I didn't know what they were talking about. Facebook? What is that? Anyway, that's a bad joke. But many, obviously, you guys are more adept at that. So you may want to try to find a way to join an online community of people who are doing things like this. I guess that's the simplest way of putting it. Find a way to join an online community. It doesn't have to be a big one. Yeah. And maybe, Patty, you could go public somehow just with this group of people, so those who might have something like that going could contact you.
Cool. Well, it's been about an hour, so we probably want to wrap it up.
Why, man? I'm having a good time.
Oh, you're on a roll. I know. I was afraid you're going to say something at the end there to kind of blow it, but
yeah. But I know it's past Tim's bedtime. He's on the East Coast, so
that's true.
He's got to get his beauty sleep. He obviously has to get his beauty sleep. So
you don't look like this.
Just naturally.
Without getting like 8 hours.
He's got to work at it.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, it's been really sweet talking to you. Thank you for for doing this general thing and showcasing tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. 10th anniversary, revised and expanded edition, 40% new material, double the amount of tactics. Thank you. For doing that on the listeners' behalf.
Yeah, well, we all appreciate that you wrote it and that you put it down in such an effective way. And of course, we all teach the material because we believe in it. We think it's awesome. And a number of people commented throughout the discussion how much they appreciate that you wrote it and how well it is and how it's impacted their life and ministry. So we're all grateful.
But if you want to have a really, really good time, read The Story of Reality.
That's right. That actually should be your next book to read. If you guys
that's your next book.
Tactics and love it, definitely go for Story of Reality.
Yeah.
So.
And actually, when we were deciding what books to choose, what book to choose for the book club, that was the toss up. And I actually, my vote was for Story of Reality.
It's true. It was.
Well, that might be a good choice for a second book, but no pressure. I'm just. It almost seems like nepotism if you do that twice in a row, kind of like a organizational nepotism. So, they're just trying to appeal to the boss here. But
it's the STR Book Club where we only read Greg Koukl.
Books by Greg Koukl. We could retitle it the STR Greg Koukl Book Club.
That's true. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Well, thanks all of you for joining us on Facebook and YouTube. We are going to sign off, and if we start another book club, we will notify you guys probably in the same platform. So, all right. Thanks, John. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Alan.
STR Book Club signing off.
See ya.
See ya. Bye.